You're under arrest for treason." The words cracked through the chandelier-lit ballroom like a rifle shot, stopping the string quartet mid-bow and freezing the silverware above plates of prime rib. Two officers pushed through the sea of gowns and dress uniforms and seized my arms. The metal of their cuffs was colder than the air conditioning. I stood there, in full dress whites medals, catching the light salutes half raised, and then abandoned around me as whispers raced from table to table. In the front row, my father leaned back in his chair, like a man admiring his own handiwork, lips curled in a private smile. "I'm the one who reported you," he announced loud enough to carry. The room exhaled in one wounded sound. Treason. The ugliest word you can hang on an American uniform. Even a decorated one. Even a 4-star. They read the words from a folded sheet, a voice suddenly official and distant, as if reciting a part in a play. Suspicion of unlawful transfer of classified material. Misuse of federal systems. A complaint lodged by a citizen witness. I barely listened. The words were props. The accusation was theater. I felt every eye on my shoulder boards, on the ribbon racks, on a small scar beneath my ear that never disappears under makeup. They stared as if searching for a crack through which the charge might seep and make sense. Cameras rose like a tide. Somebody muttered, "Her father." Another, "My God." A retired chief I knew from 20 years back started to stand. His wife caught his sleeve and shook her head. I kept my chin level, my hands still, my breathing slow. There are worse places to be than under a brutal spotlight. I've been pinned to the earth by the cyclone of a landing rotor, pressed into a wave-slicked deck while the night cut like glass, and I've held a mother's letter in a gloved hand because her son could not. The quartet stopped. The hum of the HVAC felt suddenly loud, a low, steady wind against the flags on the stage. The podium where I was meant to accept an award still shone with its polished brass seal, reflecting a room that was now breaking apart. A server slipped on nothing and caught herself. A politician nearest me shifted his chair, so the seat back formed a shield. No one spoke my name. No one said, "Admiral." The officers turned me toward the side aisle and the wide double doors that had welcomed so many grand entrances. My heels clicked evenly on the marble. I did not offer resistance. I did not offer comfort. I did not look for sympathy. I have learned over years and oceans that silence can carry more authority than any speech ever written. Behind that silence, thoughts arranged themselves with a precision that has saved lives. The complaint had come from him. He said so himself. That fit the pattern, the jabs that began the day I signed my commission. The first Christmas leave, when he stood me at the tree like a misbehaving child and called my uniform a costume. The year I made flag rank, and he sent flowers to my brother instead. Envy shrinks a man. Resentment hollows him out. Tonight he wanted spectacle, and he found it. He wanted me small under his shadow, and he thought he had learned the switch that dims me. He has never understood where my light comes from. "Admiral, ma'am," one officer said quietly, almost apologetically, when we paused near the aisle to let a table of donors push their chairs back and make a path. His partner kept his grip firm, but avoided my eye. They'd been told to do something that didn't fit easily in the body. I don't blame them. Instructions can be a blindfold. I gave a small nod and let them guide me on. A woman near the aisle held a napkin to her mouth, eyes too bright. I recognized her from a Veterans Hospital fundraiser years ago. She had pressed a photograph into my hand of a son who came home different. "Is it true?" she whispered, as if treason were contagious. The napkin trembled. I looked at her and said nothing. Not because I could not speak, but because one word from me would become 1,000 from everyone else. Across the room, my father raised his glass to no one in particular and took a slow drink as if savoring something aged and expensive. He always liked the taste of his own certainty. The double doors were 30 feet away when I felt the faintest tremor underfoot. Not an earthquake, not the clatter of serving trays, a rhythm. Boots somewhere beyond the corridor, not hurried, measured. A sound I know the way a farmer knows rain by smell. The officers escorting me didn't notice. The crowd did not. The chandeliers held their breath. A part of me wanted to smile, and another part, the part that has learned to stay 3 moves ahead, cautioned patience. Let the scene play to the end of this act. The next is written and rehearsed elsewhere. I have tried more times than I can count to explain to myself the precise hour when a father turns from critic to enemy. It doesn't happen all at once. It collects like silt in the bends of a river. He loved to tell the story, at least his version of a teenage daughter who argued too well, who beat the boys at calculus, who outthrew a coach's son by 5 yards. He softened it when he had an audience framing it as pride laced with concern. In private, he made it a grievance. When my first command letter arrived, he folded it once and slid it across the table, as if returning a bill that wasn't his. This, he said, tapping the seal is where you forget your mine. I didn't forget. I learned to be more than what he could carry. We passed the table that had been mine. My untouched place card lay face down by the bread plate. I had picked that seat, because from there between 2 flags, you could see the stage head-on without the glare of the center chandelier. I had planned to stand later and thank the corpsmen, whose names never make the program, the sailors who never stand in front of microphones, but always in front of danger. I had planned to point to the row of gold stars stitched into the hem of memory that no one alive can wear. I had planned to say in words I revised all afternoon that honor is not a medal pinned under a light, but a long, disciplined quiet that survives beyond applause. The paper with those words was still in my clutch until one officer, meaning to be careful, brushed it from my hand. It slid under the table and disappeared among the shoes. When we reached the doors, my father's voice followed like a hook. "Look at her," he said almost tenderly, to whoever would grant him their attention. Even now, she thinks she's above the law. He has always confused stillness with contempt, quiet with superiority. He cannot read blankness as discipline. He cannot fathom that restraint is not fear. I did not turn. I did not give him the theater of my face. Beyond the doors, the rhythm I had felt became more distinct, a cadence carried by the floor itself. The officers tightened their hands on my arms, not because they sensed what I sensed, but because the crowd pressed closer. Cell phones raised. Flash. 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 Time narrowed to a bright corridor. I tell you this not to persuade, but to record humiliation isn't the same as defeat. Humiliation is heat. It can melt you into shapelessness if you let it, or it can temper you. I remembered a desert night when we waited for dawn behind a low wall, sand crawling into every seam of our gear, the world quiet except for the far-off rattle of a generator and a dog that barked once and then thought better of it. I remembered the weight of a satellite phone, a sentence that changed a mission profile, and the exact color the sky turns 2 minutes before first light when the world chooses itself again. Tonight, the sky was plaster and crystal and indoor air, but it would choose again all the same. The law is not a rumor. Neither is truth. The right-hand door swung inward on its brass hinge before we reached it. The officers halted, surprised. The crowd's whisper crashed into silence, as if someone had pulled the plug on a stadium. Boots crossed the threshold in a line steady, commanding the sound of discipline made visible. My father's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I didn't need to look to recognize the posture, the faces, the resolve. I kept my chin level and my breath even. If you were there, if you stood with your napkin trembling or your phone aloft, you would say the temperature changed. You would say the air became a different thing. You would be right. He had no idea who I really was. I wasn't born into uniforms and medals. I was born in a town that smelled like cut hay in June and hot asphalt in August, where Friday nights meant football, Sunday mornings meant church, and every conversation at the diner circled back to what your father did for a living. Mine ran a small construction outfit and a larger reputation. He shook hands the way some men swing hammers hard fast, showing you the veins and daring you to flinch. The first story anyone told about me was not my first word, or the teeth I lost on the porch step, but the Little League afternoon when I threw a ball farther than the coach's son, and my father laughed a half-second too late. "Atta girl," he said, voice thick a smile, like a shirt ironed wrong. When the coach's wife said, "She's something," he replied, "For a girl. If you were there, you'd have thought it was nothing. A shrug, a joke. That's how it starts, sand grains of dismissal gathering into dunes." School came easy. I liked the way numbers lock into place with a click you can feel in your teeth. I liked history even more, the fixed stars of names and dates, the constellations of cause and consequence, the way our country keeps trying to correct itself in public. I wrote an essay on the Battle of Midway, and another on the Tuskegee Airmen, and my teacher, Mrs. Klein, pressed the corner of the paper to her cheek as if it were warm. "You have a knack," she said. "You have a duty," my father countered at dinner, tapping his fork against his plate. "To practical things. To what pays." When a recruiter visited our high school with a slideshow of the Naval Academy, the stone, the river, the gray-blue mornings, I felt something align inside me, like a compass that had been agitated, settling back to true north. I brought home the brochure. My father read it as if the pages were a trespass warrant. "They'll eat you alive," he said. "You'll cry and crawl home, and I'll have to explain you to the neighbors." My mother, quieter and kinder in all things, said, "She won't cry," and put the brochure under a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, as if to say, "There is a beam for you, look." Fathers are supposed to bless or refuse. Mine bargained. "Go to state," he said, meaning the nearest public university 30 miles down the highway. "Study accounting. You'll thank me." He did not like the academy's application process. He did not like the medical forms, the nomination letters, the way the congressman's aide looked directly at me when asking the questions. "She's 17. He barked as if that number were a defense. "So were you." Once the aide replied, and my father didn't enjoy remembering. He sulked through spring. When the appointment came thick, envelope seal raised enough to feel with your thumb, I took it out to the porch to open alone. The evening smelled like cut grass and the sweet metal odor of the grill. He watched me read the words. He did not ask to hold the paper. He said, "Don't get smart with us when you come back as if intelligence were insolence and leaving an act of war." I did not come back the way he meant. Plebe summer teaches you how to take a command without taking it personally, how to breathe when your chest wants to tumble, how to stitch your own frayed edges before anyone else notices. The first time I returned home in white on white, our pastor shook my hand and gripped my forearm with his other hand like men do when they mean it. The VFW post commander gave me a nod that was worth more than applause. My father introduced me not as my name, but as this one, and added, "She's got ideas." The men laughed, even the kind ones, because laughter is oil on old gears. Later in our kitchen, he pointed to my shoulder boards and said, "Do they make those in men's sizes?" The joke sat between us like a dead thing. I learned to move around it. When you begin to excel, people in a small town keep score. Mrs. Klein sent letters to the editor about our own, and I folded them into my footlocker with the spare socks. I learned charts and currents and the austere mercy of checklists. I learned the distinction between fear and panic the same way you learn the difference between weather and climate by standing in both long enough. Each promotion came with a phone call home. Mine were short. His were shorter. "Don't get a big head," he said when I made lieutenant. "Paper ranks," he muttered when I made commander. When I pinned on Admiral, he didn't pick up. He texted a thumbs up, his first and last emoji. You might ask why I kept trying. Because duty runs forward as well as up. Because there were younger women watching. Because the work mattered to sailors, whose hands remember the weight of lines at 2 a.m., to families waiting 3 deployments deep, to names engraved on brass that never get dust. Because service teaches you a long patience, and long patience lets you outlast 1,000 small doubts. And because even when I stopped expecting my father's blessing, some stubborn part of me believed he might stumble into pride by accident. 1. Thanksgiving. Between deployments, we drove past the river that lifts a thin gray mist at dusk and makes even the mill stacks look beautiful. Inside the house, football babbled from the TV, and my brother-in-law argued with a nephew about carving. My father took the carving knife just to show the room he could, And when I reached for the platter, he said, "Careful, Admiral, wouldn't want to violate a turkey's chain of command." The room laughed. My mother gave me that look she wore too often, apology stitched to love. I kissed her cheek and said nothing, because silence is sometimes a gift to more than one person at once. The first real fracture arrived, not with a slam, but a sigh. A local paper ran a profile on hometown Admiral, half cornball, half careful. The reporter got 2 dates wrong and 1 quote right. The only one that might have saved us if anyone had listened. Leadership means remembering what you serve. My father clipped the article and left it on his workbench with a coffee ring growing from the corner as if to mark it spoiled. When I stopped by that afternoon, he said, "You think you're better than this place?" I said, "No, I think I belong to more than one place." He heard what he wanted. His jaw set. That was the day he began using the word "they" for people in uniform, as if I were not standing in front of him. By then, I had seen enough of the world's sorrow to know that bitterness has a way of recruiting accomplices. A cousin started parroting his lines. A neighbor warned me not to bring politics to the 4th of July parade, by which he meant don't stand too straight in front of the band. The men at the diner kept eating eggs and calling me soldier on purpose. It was almost funny, until it was not. The day my mother found a flyer stuck under the windshield wiper, anonymous misspelled, suggesting I'd gotten special treatment. She folded it neatly, handed it to me, and said, "Your father has friends who think they're helping." Her hands shook. I put the paper in my pocket and told her it would pass. I did not tell her that rumors don't pass. They calcify. So when you ask how a father picks up a phone and gives your name to a stranger who will put it in a system, that will print it on a form, that will be tucked into a folder, that will ride in a cruiser to a ballroom where a quartet will stop playing mid-bow, I answer this. A man does not jump off a cliff in a single day. He steps down a slope and calls it standing still. He tells himself he is protecting something, his pride, his town, his story. He convinces himself you stole those things first. By the time the cliff edge arrives, the ground behind him has already given way. I still carry the town inside me, the diner coffee, the river, miss the porch, with the loose board that catches your heel if you forget yourself. I carry the good voices too, and the old men who taught me to square a corner, and the women who pass casseroles like sacraments. I carry my mother's quiet, and the pastor's grip, and the VFW commander's nod. I carry them into every room where someone mistakes a uniform for armor against hurt. Hurt finds a way. So does honor. You can't always hold both at once, but you can hold steady long enough for one to teach you how to bear the other. That's what I learned before medals, before salutes, before any door burst open to rescue me from a lie. The roots of betrayal are local. The cure is larger. I did not become an admiral by winning arguments at home. I became one by learning to win. Time to let storms spend themselves without letting them rearrange my purpose. The academy made that lesson concrete. Before sunrise, the yard turned into a metronome of feet and breath and orders and steel. I studied until numbers held steady in my head, ran until the horizon quit wobbling, and learned to absorb a correction without losing a millimeter of height. Navigation taught me the math of risk, seamanship, the grammar of cause and effect. You make a plan, then you make a backup plan, and then you learn to trust the person next to you enough to throw both away when the sea says so. Sea duty gave me a second spine. You can memorize weather and still know nothing until a wall of green water rises like a moving building and the deck tilts into angles with no names. I learned how a ship speaks through your boots, how the hum shifts half a note before a bearing overheats, how people will follow you if they see you at 2 a.m. when the coffee is burnt, the logbook is smudged, and the only reward is another hour done right. Old chiefs were my professors. They taught me what matters, and what only looks like it does, how to say again without anger, and how to say enough without apology. I was not promoted because I was a novelty. I was promoted because missions ended the way they were drawn on a whiteboard instead of the way anxiety imagines them at midnight. My first command, I made the mistake new skippers make. I explained too much. A chief, with a voice like a gravel road, cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, they don't need poetry. They need a picture." He was right. I started sketching boxes and arrows on a pocket card. Before every evolution, something a bosun's mate could glance at and know exactly where to put his hands. We ran drills until muscle memory turned into culture. When it counted, culture is what kept the water out and the panic down. Hard things came anyway. We lost a sailor in heavy seas when a freak line snapped. I wrote the letter to his mother 3 times and mailed the 4th. The first 3 tried to make meaning where there was only absence. The 4th told the truth and promised no more than memory can keep. His division reported for the next watch, and I stood with them, not because it was heroic, but because the deck does not care about your sorrow, and the sea remembers only competence. Selection boards notice results more than speeches. I moved from ship to staff and back again, learning how decisions travel, how they stall, and how they die. The difference between secrecy and privacy, the temperament of budgets, the impatience of calendars. Most of all, I learned to hear the question beneath the question when a young officer knocks and asks for 5 minutes. "Ma'am, what should I do?" Often means, "Will you still believe in me if I choose wrong?" The answer is steady presence. You keep your door open, your back straight, and your promise is short enough to keep. The assignment that put me near special operations looked glamorous from far away. Up close, it was logistics raised to the level of nerve and timing that cannot be taught outside consequence. The first time I briefed a mixed element that included SEALs, I cut the slides in half and doubled the white space. I circled only what instinct could not supply. A senior enlisted man with a calm face and ruined knees told me afterward, "Ma'am, that'll do." In that world, there are few higher compliments. Working with them required a new kind of quiet. The best are not loud about being the best. They are meticulous about water blister tape batteries promises. They keep superstitions and checklists in the same pocket. They hate wasted words and respect necessary ones. Trust arrived the same way it always does there, by being exactly on time, never, almost. By knowing the third option on the map. By admitting what I did not know before anyone else had to pay for it. I earned enough trust that when something far from home needed doing, my phone rang and the question was simple. "Can you hold it together?" The answer was yes, and then it was a plan, and then it was a flight at 0300. News of promotions drifted home like weather reports from another continent. When I pinned on 1 star, the pastor wrote a note on a plain card and slipped it to my mother at church. When I pinned on 2, the VFW commander sent a bouquet that looked like a parade stuffed into a vase. When I pinned on 3, my father stared into his coffee and said that the ceiling. When I pinned on 4, he said nothing at all, which said everything. At the diner, he told anyone who would listen that rank is politics, and politics is for people who can't swing a hammer. I knew better than to argue with a sermon delivered to an audience of eggs and bacon. I kept my own story honest, because life refuses to be anything else. I signed a travel voucher in the wrong box and spent days untangling it because ethics is not a slogan. It is paperwork done right. I chewed out a lieutenant in front of a petty officer and apologized in front of the same petty officer because dignity is not divisible. I missed a funeral when weather closed an airfield and wrote a 5th letter to a mother whose patience outstripped my own. These are not the glamorous pages in a career, they are the true ones. The closer I came to the top, the more I pointed attention away from me and toward the work. Reporters wanted personality. Sailors wanted predictability. I gave the second and tried to be polite to the first. A magazine asked for a photograph of my daily essentials laid out on a table. I sent a list, maps, pens, a small flashlight, a phone I could not photograph, and the words, "Today's plan," on a torn scrap of paper. They did not run it. That was fine. Essential should still mean essential. The job carried me across oceans and into rooms with carpets thick enough to swallow a heel. I briefed men who bragged about shaking my father's hand when they were young, and men young enough to be my sons who kept their hands flat on the table when the conversation turned hard. In every room, I kept 1 chair empty in my mind for the sailors who would live with the consequences of whatever we decided. It kept my sentences shorter. At some point, his disapproval became less a wound and more a weather pattern. You cannot argue the wind into behaving. You dress for it. You route around it. You note the direction and get on with your work. Sometimes he answered my calls. When he did, we spoke of traffic and bills and a neighbor's truck that finally gave up. He never asked about the people whose names I carried like prayer beads. I stopped offering details, not because I was secretive, but because handing him my work felt like laying a clean flag over a muddy table. Promotion to the highest rank felt nothing like victory and everything like assignment. The ceremony was brief. I thought of chiefs and corpsmen and the desert morning that dries your mouth just before first light. Then I went back to work. The next months were a thicket of briefings and budgets and an inquiry into a procurement hiccup that might have become a scandal if we had let it. We did not let it because discipline is a habit long before it is a headline. So when the invitation arrived for the gala back home, I accepted. Not because I needed applause, but because I dislike the idea that pride of place belongs to the loudest voice. I plan to stand, accept the plaque name The Corpsman out loud, and remind the town that service is not a stranger who only appears in a parade. I knew my father would be there with his jaw set, measuring each sentence for arrogance. I did not know he had already found a different audience, one that answers the phone on the first ring and writes things down in ink. The night approached like weather you can watch building while friends insist the picnic will be fine. I pressed my uniform, checked the small silver pin whose post likes to loosen at the worst moment, and tucked my speech into a clutch beside a photograph of a squad I still dream about once a month. I walked under the flags, and chandelier light nodded to men who had once promised me their prayers, and took my seat. I knew who I was. I suspected who he had decided to be. I did not yet know how far he had decided to go. Betrayals don't arrive as thunderclaps. They arrive as errands. A cousin asks for the date of the gala. A neighbor wonders aloud whether the auditorium has side entrances or just the main doors. A man at the hardware store mentions the police scanner app he keeps open on his phone and says, "You hear some things. People mean nothing by it until they do." The week before the gala, my mother left a voicemail that started 3 times and found its way to the end on the 4th attempt. "Your father's been spending time at Mickey's. They talk big there. Don't be late that night." She did not say what I already knew, that he loved the sound of his voice most, when the room tilted toward him. Pride needs witnesses. Revenge craves them. We had months earlier untangled a minor procurement hiccup before it could turn into a headline. It was a nothing that could be made to look like a something by anyone whose blood ran hotter for scandal than for accuracy a part mislabeled on a shipping manifest. A shipping clerk new to the desk. A delay in reconciling a line item because the software update lagged behind the policy memo. We fixed it the way adults fix things, forms resubmitted signatures, collected the lesson written down where the next person could read it. If you wanted to build a fire out of damp kindling, though that hiccup would do, you would need a match and a man happy to strike it. Somewhere in the week before the gala, a call was made to a number whose recordings begin with the words, "This line is monitored." The transcript I would later read showed a man stating his name, then quickly correcting himself to initials, as if outrunning his own impulse. He claimed I'd misused access to classified systems, used a term he'd heard, but could not place in context, and repeated the phrase "stolen documents" twice, the way a performer repeats a punchline that didn't land the first time. He insisted he wanted to remain anonymous for family reasons. He sounded pleased with his mastery of the phrase. He was careful not to breathe too loudly. He did not know or did not care that the agents listening make their living separating heat from light. I did not know about that call until later. What I did know was this: my father had developed a talent for getting things almost right. Almost the right phrase, almost the right posture, almost the right facts. If you don't care about the difference, almost can carry you through a room and out the door with the prize. If you do care, almost is a thud you feel in your teeth. On Tuesday, he told a neighbor that even admirals answer to the law. He wasn't wrong. On Wednesday, he told another that classified just means covered up, and he wasn't right. On Thursday, he was overheard telling the barber that big people only fall properly if you pick the moment, and he believed that was wisdom. On Friday, he bought a new tie. The morning of the gala, a patrol car idled outside Mickey's for 20 minutes, while an officer went in for coffee and small talk. Later, that officer would write in his report that a concerned citizen had visited the station with documentation he believed showed mishandling of federal records and that the citizen had requested discretion until the appropriate time. The documentation turned out to be a printed-out opinion column stapled to a blurry screenshot of a procurement ledger from a blog that mistakes speculation for reporting. I have seen orders scribbled on the back of matchbooks hold more weight. The officer passed the packet up the chain because packets travel upward regardless of their contents. That is the nature of systems. Somewhere above him, someone who disliked embarrassment more than error called a judge. Wording was careful. A warrant issued hedged its bets, bring her in hold. Her briefly asked questions in a room without an audience. The venue was not specified. The timing was left open. The discretion that should have guided everything fell instead to the person who wanted none of it. In the late afternoon, I stood in a hotel room 3 blocks from the ballroom and checked my uniform again, smoothing a wrinkle that no one would see, and straightening a ribbon that would not move. I slid a folded speech into my clutch and tucked the old photograph behind it. My phone buzzed with a message from an old chief. No words, just a picture of a horizon line over dark water, the kind of sky that tells you dawn is on schedule. I breathed. Then I walked. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon and old smoke. Posters on easels pointed the way like polite ushers. Banquet Hall East sponsors, reception veterans exhibit. In the corridor leading to the ballroom, a teenager in a too large jacket collected tickets and looked grateful to be trusted with something. I dropped mine into the box and he grinned at the weight of the paper, as if it proved money was still real. When I stepped through the doors, the room rose, and I nodded the way you nod when applause belongs less to you than to the idea you represent. I took my seat between flags, felt the small hum in the floor that hotels make when the kitchens are busy, and set my clutch beside the bread plate. He looked good. My father has the kind of face that earns him the right tie. He had chosen blue with a diagonal stripe that suggested restraint to anyone who doesn't know how to read knives. He shook hands as if friction were a sport. He made little blades of his compliments. "You've held up well," he told a woman I served with. "For your age?" He took the seat that placed him perfectly within my view line when I would stand at the podium. The committee had not done that on purpose. He would believe they had. He always believed gravity chose him. If you have never watched a person build a stage for his own performance, know this. He will pay attention to the doors. He will calculate the distance from the chair to the aisle. He will check the sightline to the microphone. He will angle his body toward the place the light falls just enough to gild the jaw. He is not vain. He is strategic. During the sponsor's brief remarks, my father kept one hand on the table and the other near his jacket pocket, as if the fabric might whisper to him when the moment arrived. I imagine the phone there was set to vibrate. I imagine the text he waited for read something like, "Now." The arrest came not because the facts required it, but because a public man wanted a public setting. A quieter officer would have found me backstage and asked me to step out for a minute. A braver one would have phoned the agency with actual jurisdiction and asked an impolite question. The ones who walked through the doors that night were neither. They were ordinary men with an extraordinary assignment that did not fit them, and to compensate, they made it larger. The words, "treason arrest," did the work for them. They did not see what I saw, the fragility in their own hands, the tremor of a town using the law as a mirror to show itself righteous. He spoke his line as if it had been written for him. "I'm the one who reported you." He enjoyed the jolt it sent through the room, the way the nearest tables turned toward him, as if he were now the MC. He mistook shock for admiration and fear for respect. I watched him accept the moment like a trophy. He lifted his glass. He waited for eyes to confirm that he had done a brave thing. He did not look at my mother. She had chosen a seat at a different table under the pretense of helping a friend manage place cards. She held her napkin in both hands like a small white flag. Even in that humiliation, I had room for a quiet inventory. I counted exits. I counted breaths. I counted the beats between when a door opens and the brain decides what the new shape in the doorway means. I felt the line between gossip and action snap taut and understood it would not hold long. The officers' grips were firm, not cruel. The crowd's noise rose and then fell as if the room itself had lungs. A retired chief I knew took a half step and stayed put. A boy with a tray decided he would not cut across the aisle after all. Somewhere far behind the stage, a kitchen clattered on proof that the world continues to make soups and sauces while the rest of us act out our moral theater. When they turned me toward the doors, his voice followed, buoyant and sure. "Look at her," he said to the nearest donor to the heir to the version of himself he most admired. Even now. He loved that phrase, even now, as if time belonged to him. I did not look back. In my chest, the metronome I carry for emergencies began to tick. I could not yet hear boots. But I knew the measure. I knew the downbeat approaching. The lie had made its entrance. Truth was just outside right on time, waiting to be announced. The right-hand door opened first, and then the left, and the foyer light spilled across the threshold in a bright bar that made the ballroom look like a stage. The officers at my elbows stiffened. Not because they recognized the silhouettes, but because their bodies remembered something their heads hadn't caught up to yet. The sound reached us a half-beat later, the measured cadence of trained boots on stone, crisp enough to slice through crystal and chatter and fear. A line formed, not rushed, not theatrical, just inevitable, and the first man through wore nothing flashy at all. Field gray suit, clean haircut eyes like the quiet part of the ocean. He didn't need a badge in his hand. Authority traveled in ahead of him. Behind him came the team sleeves, rolled tight gear, neat, and not a strap out of place. Faces impassive, the way discipline keeps them. The murmur in the room fell through 2 octaves and then stopped altogether. Someone's phone flashed and went dark. The teenager at the ticket box in the hall leaned in to see, and a woman who had planned centerpieces for 6 months put both palms on her tablecloth to steady the little universe she had made. The man in gray stepped to the side, clearing the doorway like a valve, and the commander I knew as well as I know. The scar under my hairline stepped through and found me with his eyes before he found me with his feet. He halted 10 paces from the officers, holding my arms, spine aligned under the flag on the stage. His voice didn't carry because he shouted, it carried because it was true. "Admiral, 4-star, we are here." He came to attention like the word meant what it used to mean when men built ships out of trees, and a dozen chests behind him rose and fell as one. The room did not applaud. The room remembered itself. The officers at my side shifted. Their grips looked at him, looked at me, and looked at each other the way men do when the floor plan of the moment has changed without their consent. The man in gray flicked a glance at their hands on my arms, and it was not a warning so much as a request to speed up the calendar. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "we'll take custody of the narrative from here." He did not reach for paperwork yet. First, he reached for clarity. "There's been a misunderstanding of jurisdiction." The taller officer beside me found his voice. "We have a warrant." The man in gray nodded. "You have a warrant to ask questions. You do not have a case." He held up a leather folder, turned it so the embossed seal caught the chandelier light, and let the room read what needed reading without reading aloud. The effect was chemical. The air changed composition. He addressed me then, and there was no ceremony in it beyond the courtesy due between people who have held the same ground at different moments. "Ma'am," he said, and that was all. I gave a small nod. The commander took half a step forward and lifted his chin at the officers. "You can release the Admiral," he said. Not hard, not soft. It sounded like he was offering them a way to live with tonight when they woke up tomorrow. They let go together, not because they had been ordered, but because they understood what their hands were saying and decided they preferred different words. A man in a suit who had been pretending to be invisible near the stage found the microphone and tried to announce that the program would resume shortly. He got out the first syllable of program, before a look from the man in gray convinced him that language could wait. The commander spoke again lower, now only for the officers and for me. This will be brief. He meant the next part. He did not mean the story that brought us here. The folder opened on the table nearest us, and the first page on top was not an accusation, it was an authorization. You could tell by the signatures straight lines from people whose lives are only ink when history wants to remember them. The language was spare lawful tasking, compartmented oversight, temporary access to systems, governed by letters most people only see in novels. The dates aligned, the codes aligned. The mission set was described in 5 words that said enough to the few and nothing to everyone else. It didn't clear me because clearance wasn't needed. It affirmed that what I had done was what I had been asked to do by the government the warrant claimed I had offended. The irony would have been funny in a different room. The taller officer read fast, then slower, and his ears colored as if the blood that had rushed to triumph was making its way back to humility. We were told, he began. The man in gray didn't let him finish the sentence that would become a bullet point for someone's review board. I know what you were told, he said, still kind, and tapped the signature that mattered most. This is what's true. The shorter officer swallowed. Are we? He didn't know whether to say in trouble, or released, or sorry, so he said nothing at all. The commander spared them both an answer and addressed the room because someone should. There is no treason here, he said, and a human sound moved across the tables like a wind through wheat. My father had not planned for this. He had planned for the cuffs, the gasp, the crooked line of people leaning into him for detail. He had planned for the moment when he could deliver the last sentence of the story he'd rehearsed. Even our kind must answer. He had not planned for men whose answer is a life of showing up, nor for documents that do not bend for private resentments, nor for the way a single saluted word can redraw the map of a night. He kept his glass in his hand because he didn't know what else to do with it. The ice had melted to a single clouded cube. He looked older by the time it cracked and turned the drink wet. He still had his jaw, but his jaw no longer had him. The man in gray closed the folder, not with flourish, with finality. If anyone requires a formal statement, we'll provide it outside after the Admiral gets some air. He turned to the officers. You'll walk with us. You'll want to hear what you weren't told. They nodded, relieved to have a next step that looked like work instead of theater. The commander looked to me, not for permission, but for timing. I let one more beat pass the beat that lets a crowd settle into the truth it has just learned, and then I took one step forward, not toward the door, but toward the podium. No one stopped me. I didn't touch the microphone. I didn't need amplification for 10 words. Ladies and gentlemen, I said we'll honor the fallen first. I meant it. The agenda for the evening had always begun with the names we carry, the ones no mission brings back. I put my hand on the polished wood and bowed my head, not for show. 100 chairs rustled, and the 100 bodies in them remembered they knew how to be solemn for the right reasons. The man in gray stood at ease. The commander closed his eyes. In the silence, the teenager in the corridor straightened his jacket. When I lifted my head, I met my father's eyes across the distance. He tried to hold the old look, the one that says he still frames the world, but it faltered. For a second, naked as an unpainted wall, he looked like a man who had misread a label and served the wrong thing to people he wanted to impress. He opened his mouth, then closed it, and put his glass down with both hands, as if it had become heavy. My mother at her far table breathed out and pressed her napkin flat with her palms, the way you smooth a bedsheet after a night of fever. We walked out together, not in a parade, not in retreat. The man in gray set the pace. The officers to either side of him, the team a quiet geometry around us that felt less like protection than like respect. In the corridor, the teenager whispered, "Ma'am," and I said, "Thank you," because courtesy restores what spectacle breaks. Outside, the air had that hotel smell of mulch and chlorine and exhaust, and beyond it, the real air waited, the kind that carries night sounds, in a train 2 miles away, in a dog that barks once and then decides to save its comment for morning. On the curb, a black SUV idled and someone opened the door without making it a gesture. Before I got in, the commander. touched 2 fingers to his temple in the smallest of salutes, the kind you give when you've earned the right to eliminate flourish. "Ma'am, with your permission?" He said, "We'll brief them properly." I said, "Do." And the man in gray added, "We'll also address the source of the complaint." He didn't say my father. He didn't have to. Process would. It always does, late and slow and sure. Back inside the program would rearrange itself. A quartet would find its way back to the right measure. A committee chair would explain what could be explained. People would invent a new story they could tell themselves about what they had witnessed, one that made them brave, parceled out, and fear communal. That's human. Out here under a sky that had finally darkened enough to be honest, I took one breath of air that had nothing in it but oxygen and the faint sweetness of a municipal flower bed and let my shoulders settle. The truth had walked into a room and stood up straight. The lie had nowhere to sit. They briefed the officers in a glassed-in conference room off the lobby while I waited in the hotel's side garden, the kind of rectangle of shrubs and brick that exists mostly to give smokers a place to stand. A small fountain made the sound of coins falling into a jar. Over the hedge, the band restarted in cautious phrases as if music were a nervous animal coaxed back out of a carrier. I stood with my back to the ivy and listened to the night. It has a way of separating the noise people make from the truths they don't say. I could have left, then slipped into the SUV, gone where the briefing would be clean and the paperwork cleaner. Instead, I waited. It is not strategy to flee the conversation that makes all the others finally make sense. He came out alone, not because he wanted privacy, but because he could not bear witnesses at the moment when the narrative turned and did not carry him with it. He stopped 3 paces away, still in the doorway light, which lent him a color it does not give to any honest sky. For a second, we did not speak. We had rehearsed silence for years. We were fluent in it. He adjusted his tie the way men adjust an oath they no longer intend to keep. "You humiliated me," he said at last, choosing the only angle that could render him the injured party. I let the words pass like weather. "You humiliated yourself," I replied. The fountain counted quarters into the jar. Behind him, a bus sighed at the curb and moved on. "They told me you were dirty," he said, and I heard the coward's comfort in the passive voice. "Who?" I asked. He gave me a list of pronouns. People folks, a guy who knows a veteran at the bar, who hears things. He put the last one down like a trump card. A veteran, he repeated as if the word itself could absolve him of not knowing what he was talking about. "You didn't ask me," I said. He lifted his chin. "You'd have lied." He shot back fast with that old quickness he prized in himself. "I've never lied to you," I said, and I meant the kind of lie that plasters over rot. I have spared him details. I have never sold him fiction. "You keep secrets," he said, as if the distinction were invisible. "I keep faith," I answered. "With the mission, with the people under my command, with the country you taught me to pledge before you taught me to drive." He flinched in the smallest way, the way a body flinches when a muscle remembers work it hasn't done in years. He looked at the shrubs, at the brick, anywhere but at me. "You make me small," he said, and there it was, the part he never said in the clear. "No," I said, "I make you visible. To yourself." He swallowed. "A father is supposed to lead," he said as if quoting a calendar. "Then lead," I said. "Lead yourself to the truth. It's not far from here." He searched my face for mockery and did not find any. "I am not cruel. I do not take trophies, not even in private." He set his hands on his hips, elbows wide, the posture of a man trying to rediscover his outline. "You talk like a sermon," he said, meaning to belittle and landing instead on memory. "A sermon saved you," I said softly, because whether or not he had heard it, the words in that folder were a kind of secular absolution. "They didn't come for me because I am special," I added. "They came because the truth is stubborn. That's it. That's all." He frowned at the word stubborn. He thinks it belongs to him. "You made me the villain," he muttered. "You volunteered?" I said. They asked for a statement, he snapped. You offered a performance. He looked up sharply, stung. I wanted you to learn, he said, and I almost laughed, not unkindly. To learn what I asked. He groped for it, then assembled a pile of half-bricks: humility, consequences, respect. Respect for who I asked, gently. For you. He stood there in the doorway, light, and could not say no and could not say yes, and chose instead the refuge of anger. You're not better than me, he said. No, I said. I am better than the man you pretended to be tonight. For a long beat he breathed, and the air went in rough. All my life, he said, I built a name. You took it and made it yours. No, I said again, and it was astonishing how many wrong doors one small word could close. I took my life and made it honorable. The name is still yours. It will be tomorrow when I'm gone. What do you want it to mean? He looked at his shoes then, and the posture of a boy arrived like a shadow that had been standing off stage, waiting for its cue. I didn't know about all that he said, gesturing toward the hotel, the folder with its signatures. That's right, I said. You didn't know. You preferred not knowing. You can fix that. Start there. He lifted his eyes. There was water in them, less a tear than an admission that tears exist. What do you want from me? He asked, and it was the first honest question he had asked me in a decade. Accountability, I said. He flinched again at the bureaucratic ugliness of the word. Say what you did, I continued. To the people you told, to the men who walked through those doors with guns because you wanted an audience. To Mom? At the last word he blinked, not because he had forgotten her, but because he had miscalculated how much she had already carried tonight. She knew he asked, and the child in his voice was almost unbearable. She knew you, I said. She knows that you'll choose a stage over a table if someone hands you a microphone. He took a half step, then stopped. And you? He asked. What do you want from me? I thought about saying nothing, about letting the question hang like a sign at a crossroads. He would choose whichever road, let him pretend he'd taken the harder one. But I am not a ghost in this family. I am a daughter who happens to carry a different kit. I want a father, I said. The kind who stands in the back of a room and nods. The kind who tells the barber the truth, even when there's no one to clap for him. He folded then, not in defeat, but in a kind of structural adjustment. His shoulders lowered. The bones of his face moved toward their original positions. I don't know if I can do that, he said in a voice I recognized from a long time ago. Try, I said. That's heavy enough for today. The door opened behind him, and my mother stood there, hair slightly awry, napkin still in one hand as if habit had forgotten to return it to the table. She looked at him, then at me. It's cold, she said, meaning everything. Come inside. He glanced at her, at me, at the blank space between us, where so many unsaid things had kept their vigil. I'll talk to them, he said, and I knew he meant the donors, the barbershop. Mickey's the men who build themselves from other men's stories. Good, I said. Use short sentences. Use your own words. We walked in together, not arm in arm, not apart, a geometry that would do for now. In the lobby, the man in gray waited with the officers who looked relieved to be back in a world of procedure instead of spectacle. We'll need statements tomorrow, he said to both of us. My father nodded. You'll have mine. His voice had the plainness, dignity, lends to a sentence when pride quits renting it a costume. The commander gave me a small look that asked and answered at once. We're square tonight, I said. He said yes, ma'am, and disappeared into the elevator, leaving behind the faint smell of a hallway, cleaned recently enough to be respectable. At the ballroom door, my father stopped. The quartet had found its courage. The committee chair held the program like a man reconciling hope and notes. You don't have to go back in, I told him. I do, he said, and for once, I believed he guessed correctly. He stepped through before me and walked to his table and stayed standing. The nearest faces braced for another performance, and instead he gave them a sentence with no clever in it at all. I was wrong, he said. It traveled further than any toast. A small sound moved through the room, the one humans make when they recognize they are still capable of recognizing something. He looked at me, and I nodded. It was not forgiveness. It was the bridge forgiveness will use when it is ready to cross. Later, when the night had thinned and the committee ran out of starch and the last photo had found its flash, I stood on the loading dock where the cool air makes every breath feel earned. The sky over the river had the color of tin. Somewhere a train sent one long note across the dark like a promise held at arm's length. I thought of the girls who would see tonight retold poorly in the morning and try anyway. I thought of a town that might learn to tell a better story about itself. I thought of my father inside that room, seated now, his napkin in his lap, like a truce he might keep. I let the air go out slow and felt my shoulders unlock. Reckoning is not the end of a thing. It is the first honest page. Memorial Day came on a Monday that smelled like cut grass and charcoal, the kind of morning when flags look heavier than usual because they are bearing names. The town had painted the curbs 2 days earlier. The lines were still crisp. At the edge of the square, veterans in mismatched caps adjusted their jackets. A Boy Scout troop practiced standing still. The pastor held his binder the way you hold a bird that trusts you. I arrived without an entourage and took a place near the back under a tree that had outlived 3 police chiefs and a mayor. I don't like stages for grief. The ground does the job better. He was there already early in a way he never used to be. My father had on a suit that had seen more weddings than funerals and a tie the color of church carpet. He noticed me the way a man notices weather, with respect and without surprise. He didn't wave. He did something smaller and more difficult. He held my gaze and nodded once, not to claim me, but to acknowledge me. My mother stood between us, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like she didn't have to hold us up to keep us from falling into each other's shadows. The service began without flourish. A high school senior with a trumpet stepped forward and made the instrument sound older than he was. A woman from the Gold Star families read 7 names and stopped twice to steady her voice, and the stopping said more than perfect fluency would have. The VFW commander I respected spoke like a man watering a garden, slow, careful, attending to what matters. He called the town to remember that we are more than the sum of our commerce, that our reputation is not just a rhythm of gossip, but a ledger written in service and sacrifice. People shifted on folding chairs. Silence took a seat with us. When the moment came for the wreath, the committee chair cleared his throat and looked down at his program as if consulting a map. "We invite Admiral." He began cautious and then said my name the way it is meant to be said in public, plainly without apology or italics. I walked forward only as far as the first row and stopped. "Today, the wreath belongs to the families," I said. The woman who had read the names stood and took the ribbon with both hands. No camera tried to make it about anything else. The town let the moment belong to who it should. It would have been enough, but life had a second measure written for the day. The VFW commander raised his chin toward the crowd. "Before we close," he said, "a citizen has asked to speak briefly. People don't usually ask to speak at memorials unless they want to pick a fight with the calendar." But my father stepped forward, and the crowd understood in an instant that the fight was with himself. He didn't take the mic from the commander. He let him hold it the way a sponsor holds a rope. "My name is..." He began, and then said his name like it weighed what it should. "I made a mistake," he said next, and the second sentence came out cleaner than the first. "I mistook attention for truth. I told a story I wanted to be true because it made me feel like a man who sees through things. I hurt my daughter. I disrespected the people who serve. I did it in public, so I will say this in public. I was wrong. No theatrics. No embroidered wisdom. Just the simple carpentry of a sentence built square. The sound that moved over the chairs wasn't applause. It was a collective exhale that said the town still knew how to breathe together." He turned toward me without turning the moment into a performance. "I'm going to spend time learning what I didn't bother to know," he said. "If you see me at Mickey's and I talk nonsense, tell me to hush. If you hear me at the barbershop and I start with, 'I heard,' tell me to start with, 'I was told wrong.' I'll practice. The commander closed the mic. The pastor put a hand on my father's shoulder, as if to say that repentance can also be ordinary, and that's when it lasts. After the service, people did what people do. They formed a line without admitting it's a line. Some wanted to shake my hand, and some wanted to touch my father's elbow, and some wanted simply to stand nearby until their breathing matched the town's again. A boy in a scout uniform looked up at me and asked, "Is it hard to stand still when they say things that aren't true?" I told him the truth. Yes, and it's harder to move well if you haven't practiced standing still. He nodded, as if he could feel the lesson fit in his pocket, next to a folded merit badge card. My mother invited us to the house for lunch. The table held potato salad and ham and a lemon cake with a single sag in the middle that made it more trustworthy. We ate without ceremony. Halfway through a second cup of coffee, my father reached into a drawer and produced a small box I hadn't seen in years. Inside lay the crooked, scuffed class ring he used to wear when he needed to feel like someone who once finished something. He set it on the table between us. "I was proud of this," he said, "and I let it do too much work for me." He slid it toward me, then stopped and laughed at himself. "Old habit," he said, and slid it back. "No," I said. "Keep it. Let it do the right work now." We didn't fix everything that afternoon. That's not how moral math works. You don't balance the ledger in a single column. You start writing in the right book. He asked questions, the kind that fit into sentences ordinary people can live with. How does a mission become yours? Who signs? Who watches? How do you keep faith with people who can't know the details? I answered with the same kind of sentences. I told him how silence is not a lie when it protects the living. I told him how humility travels better than certainty. I told him how service isn't a costume. It's a promise you renew every time you're tempted to be the main character. When I left, the afternoon had turned the river to tin again. A breeze off the water lifted the corner of the porch flag, and the sound was less a flap than a whisper. He walked me to the steps and stopped on the second one, exactly where he used to stand when I went off to school. "I'll be at the next ceremony," he said, "in the back where good fathers stand." "Good," I said. "Bring your own folding chair." He smiled, and it didn't try to sell anything. On the drive back, I thought about the people who will never get this kind of ending, the daughters whose fathers never learn the difference between being right and becoming good, the mothers who hold napkins forever. I thought about the men in gray suits whose work is to pull truth through systems, like thread through cloth, until the pattern appears. The commanders who speak just enough, the teenagers who straighten their jackets when the moment asks for their small bravery. I thought about the girls who will watch a clip of this day, stripped of its context, and find inside even a clumsy edit, a reason to keep their backs straight. You do not get to choose your whole audience. You do get to choose your voice. If you've carried a betrayal through your life, the way a soldier carries weight, a quiet, grinding burden, you are not alone. If you've been the person who told a loud story because the quiet one asked you to change, you can still put the mic down. Start small. Make one correction where you once made a claim. Stand in the back. Nod when someone else speaks the truth you were not ready to carry. And if this story gave you a measure of steadiness, share it with someone who could use a steadier afternoon. Stories travel further when they lay down burdens instead of collecting them. Thank you for listening, for remembering, for standing with those who serve and those who wait.